April 1945. Germany is collapsing, and one general disappears without a trace. No orders, no farewell, no witnesses. General Victor Reinhardt, strategist, engineer, and the man rumored to oversee the Reich's most secret projects, vanishes into the Austrian Alps, leaving behind only whispers of a hidden estate and a plan called Project Dawnfall. 78 years later, deep beneath the snow, investigators uncover his underground fortress. What they found shakes the whole town onto his knees. Inside, coded journals, sealed crates of gold, luxury chambers, and signs that someone had lived there long after the war ended. Was Reinhardt hiding treasures? Protecting something lost? To understand what forensic found beneath the estate, we have to go back to the night he disappeared in 1945. General Victor Reinhardt was no ordinary officer. He was the mind behind the German army's most efficient supply routes, the man who could keep a crumbling war machine alive when logic said it should have fallen apart. More engineer than soldier, Reinhardt's genius wasn't in fighting, it was in surviving. And when the Reich began to collapse, he was already prepared for what came next. The last confirmed sighting placed him near the Tiergarten, stepping into a line of 3 unmarked black staff cars. Each carried unfamiliar military insignia, symbols not tied to any known division. The convoy rolled out under the cover of darkness, heading south, toward Bavaria, then into the Austrian Alps, and vanished without a trace. Allied intercepts caught one final transmission, Reinhardt moving, cargo secured, then silence. No crash site, no capture, no body. When Berlin finally fell, so did every record of him. His family received only a single message from the remains of the government: missing, presumed dead. But whispers grew louder. American intelligence officers uncovered financial trails that didn't make sense. Bank transfers to Swiss accounts, coded telegrams months after Germany's surrender, and property deeds signed with Reinhardt's name long after his supposed death. To locals in Austria, it was simpler. They spoke of convoys moving through the mountains at night, headlights covered, engines low, and crates so heavy it took 6 men to lift one. And though the war had ended, something about those late-night transports suggested Reinhardt's mission hadn't. Most people will scroll away and forget this ever happened. But not you. You have stayed, so please subscribe, because some mind-blowing stories are coming your way. In a quiet village near Salzburg, an aging shepherd swore he once saw German soldiers working under the cover of night, unloading heavy crates into a rocky mountainside before sealing the entrance with explosives. It sounded like thunder trapped inside the mountain, he said. By dawn, the slope looked untouched. The tunnel was never found. Still, whispers never faded. Over the years, fragments kept emerging. Documents signed in Reinhardt's name, gold bars stamped with wartime insignias, and the occasional rumor of a ghostly German general living under a false identity somewhere in Austria. Official records claimed Victor Reinhardt vanished in the spring of 1945. Unofficially, his story was only just beginning. Before his disappearance, Reinhardt was more than a strategist. He was the mind that kept Germany's collapsing war machine from total disarray. Fluent in 5 languages, equally comfortable in a boardroom or battlefield, he was both engineer and diplomat. To his peers, he wasn't just a soldier, he was a system, cold, mechanical, precise. They called him the clockmaker, but beneath the crisp uniform and methodical calm, something had started to shift. Those closest to him noticed it after Stalingrad, the distant eyes, the way he no longer repeated party slogans, the quiet disgust when officers spoke of destiny. The same man once called the clockmaker was now creating chaos of his own by vanishing. What was so valuable that Reinhardt would bury it beneath a mountain and erase himself to keep it hidden? The answer wouldn't come from archives or witness reports. It would come decades later, when hikers in the Austrian Alps stumbled upon a metal door, sealed shut since 1945. If you enjoy stories like this, do subscribe, because more mind-chilling stories coming up in the days. Long before his disappearance, Victor Reinhardt had begun gathering things that didn't belong together: topographic maps of the Alps, property ledgers from remote villages, and unmarked folders stamped Geheimsache, classified. He requisitioned rail shipments with vague destinations, the crates labelled as industrial supplies. But the manifests told another story: artwork, foreign currency and gold, marked with Reich seals. By 1944, Allied intelligence already suspected something was off. Reinhardt wasn't the type to steal. He was too disciplined for greed, too calculated for betrayal. Inside Berlin's higher circles, quiet murmurs began to circulate, rumors of Der Rückplan, the retreat plan. Some said it was a blueprint to safeguard Germany's hidden wealth, to ensure that if the Reich fell, its power could someday rise again. Others whispered it was purely personal, a means for Reinhardt to vanish into the mountains with everything he needed to build a new life. When an officer once confronted him about the rumors, Reinhardt's response was unnerving. He smiled faintly and said, "History always repeats itself. I'm only making sure I'm ready for the encore." After the war, Allied investigators tried to trace him. They followed fragments of radio intercepts, coded telegrams, and blurred photographs showing alpine valleys dotted with old bunkers. But every trail ended abruptly, maps that led nowhere, witnesses who vanished, documents that seemed to erase themselves. The deeper they searched, the clearer it became. This wasn't a disappearance. It was an operation. A retreat not born of panic but of calculation. April 1945. Germany was imploding. Berlin was burning, and Hitler's voice echoed from beneath the city. But far from the chaos, in a hidden valley near Salzburg, the rhythm of war still ticked in perfect order. Supplies moving, soldiers obeying, engines rumbling under snow, as if one man's plan was still unfolding. The cargo secured message from earlier begins to make sense. It wasn't an evacuation. It was the execution of the retreat plan, and within weeks, Victor Reinhardt would disappear completely. But the first clue to his secret estate wouldn't surface until 77 years later. And when it finally did, it raised one haunting question. What else did he hide beneath those mountains? The retreat plan. Some said it was a blueprint to safeguard Germany's hidden wealth, to ensure that if the Reich fell, its power could someday rise again. Others whispered it was purely personal, a means for Reinhardt to vanish into the mountains with everything he needed to build a new life. A farmer named Johann Huber was tending to his goats one misty morning when he witnessed something he would never forget. A convoy of military trucks crawling quietly up the forest road toward the Untersberg Mountains. Their engines were muted, their movements deliberate. Canvas tarps concealed the cargo, but when the wind swept across the valley, Huber caught a fleeting glimpse of what lay beneath, steel crates marked with the Reich's imperial eagle. At the front of the line rode a tall figure in a long grey coat. His cap was pulled low, his posture rigid, his face pale and severe. The insignia on his collar revealed a general's rank. Huber didn't know who the man was then, but decades later, when he came across a faded photograph of Victor Reinhardt in a history book, he felt the same chill in his spine. He was certain it was him. The trucks vanished into a tunnel carved straight into the mountain's base. Huber said the soldiers worked in silence beneath torchlight, unloading crate after crate into the darkness before sealing the entrance with timber and soil. When he returned the next morning, the entire road was empty. No tire tracks, no equipment, no sign of a tunnel, only a mound of fresh earth and an unnatural silence that seemed to swallow sound. 3 days later, when American forces swept through the valley, they found nothing but deserted homes and terrified villagers. Officially, the area was declared secure, but a single line buried in one intelligence report mentioned possible asset relocation via alpine routes. That document was later redacted. Nearly all of it blacked out, yet rumors endured. Locals spoke of strange mechanical noises rumbling beneath the mountain after dark, of men in grey coats seen months after the surrender, and of gold coins surfacing in mountain streams after heavy rain. Some dismissed it all as ghost stories born of fear, but others believed the mountain was hiding more than just echoes. The missing cargo mentioned in the intercepted message, Reinhardt moving, cargo secured, wasn't just rumour. It might have been buried right here. And decades later, when explorers rediscovered the sealed tunnel, what they found suggested the general had never really left these mountains at all. Because deep inside the Untersberg, the silence still hides something, and the deeper you go, the louder the past begins to speak. You followed Victor this far, don't stop now. Most people scroll past stories like this and forget. But not you. You felt something. Don't just watch, subscribe before the next secret disappears. Whatever happened in those final collapsing days of the war, it became clear that Reinhardt's disappearance was no act of panic. It was deliberate, a final maneuver executed with the precision of a man who had spent his life mastering order. Every step seemed calculated, every silence purposeful. This wasn't a retreat. It was a plan, unfolding exactly as he intended. As the world moved on, time buried the war beneath new skylines and memories. But not every ghost fades quietly. Years later, when a fresh batch of Allied files was declassified, a British historian named Margaret Ellison unearthed something strange, a folder marked Operation Eclipse, an Anglo-American effort created to hunt down Nazi fugitives fleeing through the Alps. The papers were yellowed, fragile, stamped top secret in fading red ink. Inside were lists of captured officers, each name methodically crossed out in blue pencil. But at the bottom of one list, 3 names remained untouched. The last was General Victor Reinhardt, status unconfirmed. Ellison read deeper. Reports showed Eclipse agents had tracked Reinhardt's trail through southern Germany, losing him somewhere in a narrow corridor of mountain passes along the Austrian border. One report mentioned convoys moving cultural assets. Another referenced local witnesses who'd been warned to keep silent. But the real clue wasn't in the typewritten text. It was in the margins. Someone, likely an intelligence officer, had scrawled a set of coordinates in black ink and underlined them twice. They pointed toward a remote valley in western Austria, a place with no recorded military significance. The handwriting was urgent, slanted, followed by 2 words, check tunnel. Those same mountains where a shepherd once heard thunder in the rock, now after decades they were back in the record. Ellison compared the coordinates against modern satellite maps and froze. They matched a remote zone deep in western Austria, a patch of land long marked off-limits by government decree. Officially, it was a protected environmental site. Unofficially, it was a place no one was allowed to touch. No excavations, no drones, no photographs. She filed a request for academic access. It was denied within hours. Days later, when she tried again, the file she'd referenced was gone, vanished from the public archive, erased, as if it had never existed. When she pressed further, an archivist simply told her, "There's no record of such a document, ma'am." But history has a way of resisting silence. Before the shutters closed, Ellison had already made copies. And in those surviving pages, one truth stood out. Allied agents had come far closer to finding Reinhardt than anyone had realized. They just hadn't understood that the man they were chasing might have already written his own ghost story. One designed to live on beneath the Austrian snow. As years passed, the valleys of Austria grew peaceful again, but their silence carried memory. Locals still spoke of distant sounds, the low hum of engines echoing from inside the mountains on moonless nights. Shepherds told of tremors that rippled through the soil. Parents warned their children not to wander too far into the forests, where the general's gold was said to slumber beneath the stone. No one spoke his name aloud anymore, but the legend remained. Convoys that vanished into the Alps in the final weeks of the war, never to be seen again. Some said he'd hidden crates of Nazi gold deep within the Austrian caves, an emergency fund meant to resurrect the Reich when the world grew complacent again. Others believed he'd built a secret refuge, a buried fortress where he and a select few officers could wait for history to forget them. The forests of Salzburg and Tyrol soon became magnets for dreamers, fortune-seekers, and the quietly obsessed. Treasure hunters arrived with shovels, maps, and metal detectors, convinced that beneath every stone lay a secret the war had failed to bury. In the late 1950s, 2 brothers from Innsbruck claimed they had found a sealed steel door high in the Untersberg range. They left to retrieve dynamite, promising to return the next day. They never did. Only their jeep was found, headlights still burning, engines still idling at the edge of the trail. A decade later, a prospector stumbled upon a rusted officer's helmet half buried in shale. Inside the lining were 2 scratched initials. The discovery reignited the myth, but it also deepened the mystery. By the 1970s, the story of the missing general and his gold had blurred into folklore, a campfire tale for tourists and children, something between a treasure map and a ghost story. Historians rolled their eyes, calling it post-war paranoia, a country's way of turning trauma into legend. And yet, every few years, something surfaced to remind people that legends often start with truth. A cracked crate unearthed after a landslide, filled with unmarked bars of metal, a coin stamped with an eagle where the year should have been, or a rusted tool engraved with a military inventory number that led to no known division, no known record. Just like those coded manifests Reinhardt once signed, the ones that listed gold as machinery, and soon someone would stumble on the one clue that proved the legend wasn't just a story. Because when history refuses to close a door, it means something, or someone, still waits behind it. You weren't supposed to hear this story, but now you have. Subscribe, before they realize you know too much. Then, an elderly mountaineer exploring a remote alpine ridge noticed something unusual, a faint geometric outline beneath decades of moss, the corner of a stone wall where there should have been only rock. That discovery set off an investigation that would shake historians, governments, and fortune seekers alike, because hidden beneath the myths and moss of Austria's high country was evidence that the legend of the missing general wasn't a tale at all. It was a secret waiting to be uncovered. It began, as most discoveries do, by accident. Nathan Cole was no treasure hunter or historian. He was a cartographer, a quiet academic at the University of Innsbruck, digitizing post-war land surveys for the National Archives. Day after day he scanned brittle paper maps, their corners burned and frayed after decades of storage. But one map, dated, caught his attention. Its coordinates aligned perfectly with modern terrain, except for one section deep in the Tyrolean Alps. A large rectangular area was labelled private, yet registered to no known owner. The entry was written in flawless German script, but the ink was darker, added later. The name read F. Reinhardt Stiftung. Cole frowned. There was no trace of such a foundation in Austria's legal history. Curious, he cross-checked property archives. Nothing. The record appeared once, and disappeared. The land itself was listed as restricted for preservation, a status rarely used outside of old military zones, just like the redacted check tunnels note from the Operation Eclipse file. Cole didn't know it yet, but he was about to uncover something that powerful men had spent decades keeping buried, and once he did, the legend of the vanished general would no longer belong to myth, it would return to history. At first, he dismissed it as a clerical mistake, one of countless archival mix-ups left behind from the occupation years. But when he examined the metadata, something didn't add up. The documents weren't digitized from originals. They were clean, typewritten reproductions submitted in the early by an unidentified office in Salzburg that no longer existed. When Cole brought his findings to his supervisor, he was told to drop it. Wartime files were full of phantom entries, he was reminded, records that led nowhere. But the anomaly wouldn't leave his mind. Late one night, as snow drifted against his window, he compared the coordinates from the map to modern satellite images. There, hidden beneath the blanket of pine and granite, he spotted a faint line carved through the earth, perfectly straight, too deliberate to be natural. He zoomed in further. The outline formed a rectangle, the remnants of what looked like a perimeter wall swallowed by the forest. His pulse quickened. Following the shape, he traced it to a narrow path that ended abruptly at the base of a mountain ridge. According to the registry, that ridge was still owned by Victor Reinhardt, decades after he had supposedly vanished. If the entry was genuine, then the implications were staggering. The general's refuge hadn't been a myth at all. It had been there, hidden in plain sight the entire time. By late autumn, as the first snow settled across the Tyrolean peaks, Nathan Cole gathered a small research group, 2 graduate students, a historian from Vienna, and a seasoned mountain guide familiar with the valley's forgotten trails. Armed with maps, GPS gear, and cautious excitement, they prepared to test the coordinates that had consumed Nathan's thoughts for weeks. The same coordinates once scrawled in the margins of a classified report decades earlier. What they'd soon uncover beneath, that ridge would rewrite everything historians thought they knew about the war's final days, and it would raise a far deeper question. Had Reinhardt truly vanished, or had he been waiting all along to be found? Their path led them into a narrow gorge where the forest grew eerily still, the kind of quiet that feels alive, pressing in from all sides. After hours of climbing, they emerged onto a slender plateau that overlooked a river cutting deep through layers of pale stone. There, half swallowed by roots and moss, stood what remained of a fence line. The wire had long since rusted away, but the posts remained, perfectly aligned, forming a precise rectangle that matched the map's coordinates exactly. Not far from it, the ground rose in strange, deliberate mounds. Too even to be natural, one of the students knelt, brushed away the damp earth, and exposed the corner of an old cobblestone path winding toward the trees. It stopped at a retaining wall built directly into the mountainside. In its center, a circular metal hatch sat fused with corrosion and time. The historian whispered, "This can't be real." Nathan stepped forward. Above the hatch, half concealed beneath lichen, were faintly chiseled Latin words, "Silentium est salus." Silence is safety. They worked for hours, clearing debris, until the full outline of a heavy stone doorway took shape. It wasn't a cave entrance or a mine shaft. It was engineered, intentional. When Nathan pressed his palm against the surface, the rock felt unnaturally cold. Beneath it, a low metallic tremor hummed faintly, as though something deep within was still alive. They set up camp beside the ridge that night, the alpine air sharp enough to sting their lungs. Sleep was impossible. Every crack of ice or whisper of wind felt like a warning. At first light, the team returned to the sealed doorway. Using crowbars and hydraulic jacks, they pried at the corroded seams until the ancient mechanism yielded. The door opened with a groan that echoed through the gorge, releasing a rush of air heavy with dust and iron. Their headlamps cut through the dark, and what they saw stopped them cold. Beneath the frost-covered ceiling hung a chandelier, its crystals dulled by decades of silence, swaying faintly as if disturbed by a breath of the past. Forward, his voice low. "This isn't a bunker," he murmured. "It's a home." Inside, the air was thick and unmoving, heavy with the scent of decay and oil. Their beams glided across tiled floors and concrete walls braced with steel, each line deliberate, almost graceful. This wasn't military engineering, it was craftsmanship meant to endure. Narrow air vents ran upward through the stone, forming a ventilation grid far too modern for its supposed aim. At the corridor's end stood an iron door, its hinges fused by rust, its edges sealed tight from the inside. The historian crouched beside it, brushing away corrosion until an emblem emerged, an eagle clutching a laurel, and beneath it, the initials, F. Nathan hesitated, then lifted the hammer. Each strike echoed like a countdown through the hollow chambers. After several blows, the lock gave way with a groan, releasing a gust of cold, dry air that smelled faintly of oil and wood smoke. Their beams illuminated a vast subterranean room. High ceiling of the vast chamber stood a long dining table, cloaked in a thick layer of dust yet eerily untouched, its silverware aligned, glasses arranged, and chairs perfectly spaced, as if dinner had been prepared for guests who never. To one side, rows of military uniforms hung in quiet formation along an iron rack. The insignia had faded with time, air. Nearby, wooden crates were stacked waist-high, marked with inventory codes and the black eagle of the German army. Nathan pried one open, and the scent of old oil and metal filled the air. Inside were sealed ration tins, vials of medicine, and envelopes of currency. German marks, Swiss francs, British pounds, all pristine, as though waiting for orders that never came. In a smaller adjoining room, they found an office frozen in time. Maps covered the walls, crisscrossed with red string connecting Alpine passes to towns near the Italian border. On the desk, an old typewriter sat beneath a thin veil of dust, its carriage still holding a half-typed message. Nathan brushed the page clean and read aloud, phase initiated, awaiting clearance. The historian stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't hiding. He was preparing. On the far wall, a brass plaque hung crooked, tarnished green by the years. They polished it gently until the words came into focus. Fortuna favors the prepared. Nathan stared at it in silence. The meaning was unmistakable. This wasn't a mere hideout. It was a sanctuary, engineered by a man who expected the world to fall and intended to outlast it. When word of the discovery spread, it sent shockwaves through Austria's academic and historical communities. Nathan and his team began the painstaking process of cataloguing every relic, the crates, the uniforms, the documents, each tagged and photographed with forensic precision. But then, among the relics buried between ration cards and faded correspondence, they uncovered something that froze the entire team in place. It was the same emblem that had appeared on the sealed door outside, the eagle and laurel, initials beneath, F.A., a mark that now appeared beside a new one they had never seen before, and beside that emblem lay an envelope still sealed in wax, addressed in perfect handwriting to the Ministry of Continuance. Whatever message it contained had survived untouched since the day Reinhardt vanished, and opening it would reveal whether his refuge had been a bunker of survival or the beginning of something far greater. If you think this story's over, you haven't been paying attention. Subscribe now while the forest is still quiet. It was a small leather-bound notebook, its surface cracked and curling like aged parchment, the faint imprint of the initials far pressed into its cover. Nathan turned it open carefully, the brittle pages whispering against his gloves. Inside, lines of sharp, deliberate handwriting stretched across each page. Ink dark, strokes measured, as if written by a man who believed precision could outlast time itself. The first dated entry read, 4th of May, Berlin has fallen. The Reich is no more, but our purpose is not. From there, Reinhardt's words unfolded like a map through ruin. He wrote of his escape south through the Bavarian Alps into Austria, recording, in unnerving detail, the transport of secured assets and the establishment of continuity, routes through what he called trusted channels. But as the dates progressed into late, the tone changed. The desperate voice of a fleeing officer gave way to that of a commander rebuilding order. Reinhardt's notes described construction timetables, rotating supply convoys, and coded site names marked only as S and 5th. Then, midway through the journal, a new term appeared, Project Dawnfall, Dawn. Reinhardt called it the safeguard for what must endure. A few pages later, another phrase recurred, underlined and capitalized, the circle. The circle holds firm, he wrote. Each man sworn, each refuge sealed, until the dawn returns. The historian's voice trembled as she translated, her breath catching on the final words. He wasn't alone, she whispered. He had others, and they were coordinated. As the journal continued into the final entries, it was the same fear Ellison had uncovered decades later in the missing Allied documents, records that had vanished from the archive just as Reinhardt's men had. On the journal's final page, a single line stood alone. When the dawn breaks, they will know where to find me. And that final promise, the dawn, the return, would drive investigators to re-examine every sealed tunnel and forgotten map in the Alps, searching for where Victor Reinhardt believed his world would begin again. He wrote of shadows closing in, outsiders intercepting his radio frequencies, tracking his transmissions. The last pages grew erratic, his once disciplined handwriting breaking into uneven strokes. They are here, one line read. I can hear the engines in the valley. Then, scrawled in red pencil, the final words, the silence must hold. After that, the notebook fell into emptiness, blank pages where the story simply stopped. Nathan shut the journal, his pulse hammering in his ears. In the heavy stillness that followed, a single truth rose to the surface. The general hadn't disappeared by mistake. He had been executing a plan no one else had understood. For days, then weeks. The notebook consumed him. Historians, linguists, and cryptographers joined in, dissecting every phrase, every ciphered mark. They compared Reinhardt's code to post-war intelligence files and recovered radio logs. Slowly, a pattern surfaced, something too intricate to be coincidence. Project Dawnfall, they realized, had never been a single hideout. It was the blueprint of an entire network, fortified refuges scattered through the Alps, stretching across Austria, Switzerland, and northern Italy. Each coded entry pointed to a landmark, a mountain pass, a hidden valley, a railway spur. Together they formed a constellation of safe houses linked by secret trails and buried supply caches. The words carved over the hatch echoed in Nathan's memory. Silence is safety. Now he finally understood, but one coordinate remained unmatched, A single mark Reinhardt had circled twice in red ink. It pointed farther west, beyond the maps they had studied, toward an uncharted ridge where even the satellites showed only shadow. That's where the next expedition would begin. The writing throughout the journal was exacting, clinical in tone, almost bureaucratic. Reinhardt referred to the underground estate as Zentrum Drei, Central Hub 3, implying at least 2 other bases had existed before it. The artifacts found within the chambers confirmed his precision: radio schematics, encrypted logs, and supply ledgers detailing deliveries under false identities that continued well into the late post-war years. Gradually, the truth came into focus. The estate hadn't been built as a mere shelter. It had functioned as the command center of a post-war escape network, possibly one linked to the infamous rat lines that spirited Nazi officers out of Europe. But Reinhardt's words hinted at a motive far larger than escape. What must endure, he wrote, will not be rebuilt in cities. It will sleep beneath the mountains. As the entries neared their end, the tone darkened. His once steady script began to waver. He wrote of hearing his own voice echoed through radio static, of coded messages that mirrored his transmissions. And then, the final page, dated the 13th of September. "They are coming," he wrote. "I must go deeper." Beneath that, a single phrase in Latin: "Ad lucem redit, et lux redebit." The light will return. Nathan read the words aloud, the chill of the stone chamber pressing in. This wasn't merely a record. It felt like a warning, or a prophecy written for those who would someday uncover what he'd left behind. The general had vanished into the mountains, but his silence had not died there. Somewhere beyond the estate walls it was beginning to stir again. The phrase carved above the mountain hatch echoed in Nathan's memory. Silence is safety. But what if breaking that silence meant awakening what Reinhardt had buried? The deeper Nathan and his team descended into the subterranean estate, the more it felt as though the mountain had grown around Reinhardt's secrets, sealing them in over time. In the main corridor, a false wall concealed a narrow tunnel, its entrance sealed with poured concrete, the smooth, pale kind used in modern construction. It didn't belong to the 1940s. Someone had reinforced it years, maybe decades, after the war. They brought in the cutters. Sparks burst against the rock as steel met stone, the mountain echoing with each strike. Finally, with a thunderous crack, the wall split open. A rush of stale air spilled out, heavy with oil, rust, and the dry scent of age itself. As their headlamps flicked on, a chamber emerged from the dark. It was vast, roughly the size of a chapel, and lined with rows of steel shelving stacked high with wooden crates. Dust drifted through the beams of light like a slow-moving fog. On one of the nearest crates, 2 faded seals drew Nathan's attention. The Reichsreinhardt, the imperial eagle of the Third Reich, and beside it the insignia of a Swiss bank in Zurich. His gloved hand brushed away the grime, revealing a label stamped beneath, Sicherung des Vermögens, securing of assets. He pried the lid open carefully. Beneath layers of decayed burlap, a dull golden glow caught the light. Inside lay gold bars, perfectly aligned, each stamped with serial numbers and banking codes, evidence of something far larger than simple wartime looting. But as Nathan reached for another crate, his light flickered, and for the first time he noticed fresh footprints in the dust. Someone else had been there recently, and the tunnel behind them was no longer silent. Inside another crate, they uncovered paintings, canvases torn from their frames yet still vivid beneath layers of dust. One bore a museum stamp from Krakow, another from Budapest. Each piece had been catalogued and labelled, not looted in chaos but stored with intent, as if waiting for an order that never came. But not every box held treasure. Some were filled with personal belongings, watches, wedding rings, monogrammed cutlery, objects stripped from homes that no longer stood. The historian's voice broke the silence, trembling. "These aren't spoils," she whispered. "They're evidence." Nathan could only nod, the weight of her words pressing into the stale air between them. In the far corner, a neat row of metal containers caught the beam of his flashlight. Each was sealed in red wax and marked with coded designations. When they cracked one open, the contents froze them where they stood. Passport photos, identity papers, and exit visas. Most bore South American stamps: Argentina, Chile, Brazil. It was no longer speculation. This was the blueprint of an escape network, an operation so structured it had transformed stolen wealth into lifelines for fugitives, and at the heart of it, written in Reinhardt's exacting hand, were ledgers titled Project Dawnfall, Phase Dre. He hadn't been preparing to disappear. He'd been constructing the arteries of a hidden empire, one meant to survive in the shadows long after the Reich had fallen. The phrase from Reinhardt's journal returned to Nathan like an echo through the tunnels. The circle holds firm. Now he understood. It wasn't just symbolism. It was a system, still intact. And as Nathan turned the final page of the ledger, a chill passed through him. The last recorded transaction wasn't from 1945, but from 1972. Someone had kept the network alive. The revelations from the vault set off an international uproar. Within hours, Austrian authorities sealed the mountain under military guard, while intelligence, agencies and historians swarmed the site. The media called it one of the most important post-war discoveries in Europe, but every new document pulled from the shadows only deepened the mystery. As investigators sifted through the sealed metal containers, they stumbled upon something far more volatile than gold or artwork. Letters, dozens of them, written between the late 1940s and early 1950s, all signed in flowing Latin script by a man who called himself Father Gabriel Weiss. The stationery bore the emblem of the Order of the Sacred Cross, a real Catholic aid organization once active across Austria and Italy. Yet these messages revealed nothing of charity. They spoke in coded language of refuge channels, humanitarian convoys, and sponsors in Spain and Argentina. Historians recognized those terms immediately. They were the linguistic fingerprints of the rat lines, the secret escape routes that had smuggled thousands of Nazi officers out of Europe under the guise of church protection. One letter in particular stopped them cold. The general remained steadfast, it read. The brothers in Rome have ensured safe passage for his chosen men. The assets are secured, and the dawn will find them far from judgment. Another listed a series of code names beside European cities, each followed by coastal coordinates tracing a path along the Mediterranean. To those who understood the system, it wasn't a message, it was a map. It was the missing piece that tied Reinhardt's Project Dawnfall directly to the Vatican's secret post-war network. Nathan stood silently as the historians examined each letter, their faces tightening with unease. The truth formed slowly, heavy and undeniable. Reinhardt hadn't simply disappeared into the mountains. He had designed his own erasure, built from gold secrecy and the quiet cooperation of men who hid behind the cloth. Some of the letters suggested that Father Gabriel Weiss and his circle had kept corresponding well into the following decade, long after Reinhardt's supposed death. But the final message, dated years later, was the most haunting of all. The shepherd has crossed the water. The foundation endures. The room fell silent as scholars debated its meaning. Did it confirm Reinhardt's escape to South America? Or was it a coded farewell, a metaphor crafted to ensure his myth outlived him? Nathan read the words again under the vault's dim light, a chill running through him. Reinhardt's story hadn't ended in the Alps. It had simply descended deeper, into history, into the church, and perhaps far beyond Europe's shores. Weeks after the vault's discovery, Austrian authorities sealed off the mountain estate to conduct a full forensic investigation. What had begun, as a matter of history, was now a criminal inquiry, one entangled with looted assets, falsified documents, and traces of a post-war network that had once thrived in the shadows. But deep within the estate, past corridors lined with rusted pipes and sealed storage rooms, the forensic team uncovered something that stopped everyone cold. At the end of a narrow maintenance tunnel lay a small chamber, bare, confined, almost monastic. A single metal cot stood against the wall, its mattress long disintegrated, but still marked with the faint outline of a human form. Beside it, an oil lamp sat blackened from use, a cracked teacup resting nearby. Dust cloaked every surface, yet under ultraviolet light, faint stains shimmered into view, a thin smear of dried blood across the cot's frame. Samples were taken, though few believed any trace could have survived after so many decades. Weeks later the results came in. The DNA matched distant living relatives of the Reinhardt family from Munich, with a probability exceeding 99%. The revelation hit like a ghost surfacing from the mountain itself. Victor Reinhardt hadn't fled far. He had lived here, hidden within the fortress he built, long after the world believed him dead. But there were no burial records, no trace of a body, no sign of how it ended, only silence, heavy and deliberate, as the historian murmured. He stayed here until the very end. On the floor beneath the cot, an evidence technician uncovered a small tin box, sealed with brittle wax. Inside lay a rusted skeleton key attached to a tag etched with a single word, Nordpfad, North Path. Its teeth were sharp and irregular, more mechanical than domestic, the kind designed for something heavy. Nathan turned it over slowly in his hands, studying the faint scratches worn into the metal. The key had been used often. If this was his refuge, he murmured, then maybe the North Path was his exit. The discovery reignited speculation across the entire investigation. Had Reinhardt constructed a second escape route? Or was the North Path another hidden facility, another chapter in a network that stretched deeper beneath the Alps? For the first time, Nathan wasn't sure he wanted to know. The silence inside the mountain no longer felt peaceful. It felt alive, as if the walls were waiting for someone to turn the key. By spring, the story of Victor Reinhardt had consumed the world. Governments demanded access. Journalists crowded the valley, and treasure hunters returned to the mountains of Western Austria. But under strict supervision, Nathan and his small team were granted permission to pursue one final lead. The key marked Nordpfad, the phrase carved above Reinhardt's first door, "Silence is safety," echoes in Nathan's mind as the mountain wind falls quiet. Using Reinhardt's own topographic maps, they charted a narrow route leading north, through a chain of abandoned mining tunnels near Brunnenfeld, 15 miles from the original estate. The locals spoke of that mountain as if it were cursed. The shafts, they said, had collapsed in the late 40s after a series of unexplained explosions. For weeks, Nathan and his team pressed deeper into the mountain, crawling through icy corridors where every sound echoed like a whisper. Most tunnels ended abruptly, sealed by rock and time. But deep inside the third shaft the air changed, colder, heavier. Then the walls opened into a chamber lined with fragments of concrete and twisted rebar, traces of a construction that had no link to any mining project. If this stays up, you'll want to be here when the next piece drops. Subscribe before it disappears. It wasn't a shaft at all. It was a bunker. Smaller than the first, half buried, half destroyed. Among the rubble, a dull glint caught Nathan's light. He reached down and pried a small metal tag from between two fractured slabs. Wiping away the grime, he saw the engraving, faded but still clear enough to read, General Victor Reinhardt. For a long moment Nathan didn't move. The tag shook slightly in his hand. There were no bones, no remains, only the corroded metal and a faint trace of soot on the walls, as if fire had swallowed the rest. It appeared Reinhardt had made it this far, perhaps using the key to unlock a concealed passage through the mountain, one that ultimately collapsed behind him. Whether he perished there or vanished deeper into the Alps, no one could say. The team marked the location in silence, the weight of the identification tag in Nathan's hand feeling heavier than any treasure they had uncovered. Outside, a sharp wind swept down from the north, echoing through the valley with a hollow metallic hum. Nathan turned once more toward the mountains, recalling Reinhardt's final recorded words. "They are coming. I must go deeper." Perhaps he had gone deeper than anyone would ever reach. In the months that followed, revelations from the Reinhardt estate sent shockwaves across Europe. What had started as a historical investigation had become one of the most significant archaeological and criminal discoveries of the century, a hidden network of vaults, tunnels and secrets beneath the Alps. Within weeks, Austria declared the entire area a protected national zone. Armed patrols guarded the entrances, barbed wire sealed the narrow roads, and no one entered without clearance. The estate was sealed, now known officially as the Reinhardt Complex, fell under the joint control of the Austrian Ministry of Culture and Interpol. UNESCO deployed experts to study its vast archive and determine the ethical fate of the artifacts. Meanwhile, journalists flooded Tyrol, their headlines filled with speculation about Nazi gold, the missing general, and the ghosts still buried in the mountain. For Nathan Cole and his team, the truth behind the Reinhardt estate went far beyond treasure or hidden gold. The chambers they had explored, the crumbling walls, the journals, the remnants of a life consumed by secrecy, told a different story, one not of greed or power, but of survival. Historians would argue endlessly about Victor Reinhardt's motives. Some labelled him a zealot who refused to surrender, a man clinging to the last fragments of a broken cause. Others viewed him as a strategist, a soldier determined to preserve what little remained of a collapsing world. Yet the clues left behind resisted all easy answers. His coded notes, his precision, even the inscription that read "Fortune favours the prepared," hinted at a man driven not by ideology, but by an obsession with control, a need to impose structure on the chaos consuming him. As the investigation drew to a close, one truth stood above the rest. Reinhardt had succeeded in building a world within a world, hidden beneath stone and time. His creation endured untouched, a monument to his will, and in that isolation he had achieved a strange kind of immortality. Late that night, Nathan stood before the sealed entrance, the cold air biting through his coat as snow whispered down from the peaks. Floodlights cut through the darkness, their beams tracing the jagged outline of the doorway that had once guarded an empire's final secret. He thought of the journal, of Reinhardt's final trembling words, and of the decades of silence that had kept the truth entombed. It struck him then. History doesn't erase its secrets. It hides them, beneath stone, beneath time, waiting for someone to look close enough. And when those walls finally give way, what emerges isn't just the past, it's a mirror, showing how some stories never really end. They only wait to be heard again. And if you thought this story was chilling, the one on the right will leave you absolutely speechless.